Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to start by listing the key takeaways from the entire series of webinars that we're going to present here. The first is that your human capital, your earning power, is your largest lifetime asset. And when you make decisions about where to work, when to work, you're making decisions about that asset, not just about the earnings for that particular day or week or month or year, but for the whole, for your whole lifetime of earning. And it follows from that that decisions about an issue such as caring for parents or caring for children often have a human capital component. Third, expenses that increase human capital are investments. That is, you can think of them as helping to increase your earning power and not just expenses. If they are done right, they will help you with your financial life, not just when you make them, but throughout. And finally, student loans are not just a burden, but they're informative about the full cost of education. And it's helpful to think about them that way. And we will talk about that in our next webinar next week. So let's move on and talk about taking time out from work. And let's think about the financial implications of that beyond just the loss of earnings in the year in which or years in which you're not working. And the focus of this webinar will be on the financial impact of that decision. And there are important non-financial impacts, and we're not going to think about those, but that does not mean that they're not important, but simply that we can't, not can't, but the focus here is on the financial. And a financial model can't capture those personal benefits and personal costs. And when you're making a decision about whether or not to take time out from work, you can balance or must balance the financial implications against those non-financial or personal benefits and costs. The point that we're making here is that it's very important to have a full sense or a complete sense of those financial costs when you're thinking about the personal benefits and costs. Well, why would anyone take time out from work? And of course, there are lots of reasons, but for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to think about a few. One of them is to raise a family. A second is for a sabbatical, to take time to breathe or for a special vacation. And third is to care for a loved one. And we're going to think about the first one and the last one in this webinar. And when you take time off from work, there are several different ways of doing it, and they have different financial implications from the perspective of employee benefits and the focus of this webinar from the perspective of your human capital, your earning power. And we're going to be specific, or when we say earning power, we think about some specific items that describe or have impact on that human capital or earning power. One of them is your network, your professional network, the people that you know in your business or in your work, and the people who know you, importantly. There is the knowledge that you have about how to do what you do and why it's important and who you work with in order to get it done. And then there are skills that you use to be effective in your job. And all of those can be affected by taking time off from work and how you do it. To think about that, we're going to consider a couple, Cleo and Jeremy Smith. They're both working, and this couple is thinking somewhat traditionally about how to care for the child that they plan to have. They're thinking that one of them will take time off from work, and it's probably going to be Cleo. And I'm going to say that they're not traditional in the sense that they already know that the child, even though Cleo is not yet pregnant, they already know that the child will be a boy, Daniel, because we told them that that was the way it was going to be. And to help us think this through, we've made some assumptions about Jeremy and Cleo. They're both 34. We know about not just how much they earn now, but I've made assumptions that I'm not showing here on how much they've earned up to now. And we know what savings they've accumulated, and we know about their house. And one point I'll emphasize is that we've put in addition to sort of day-to-day maintenance on the house, we've put in what we call major maintenance, which is something like or includes repairing a roof, replacing a furnace, redoing a bathroom, or something of that sort. Keeping up the house. People often forget or don't think all the way through how expensive it is to keep up a house. They think about mowing the lawn, clearing the sidewalks, getting the garbage taken away, the utilities, and so forth. But they may not always think about those other costs of ownership. Now, there are several different ways that Cleo could take time off to care for Daniel, and we're going to think of three of them. The first one is that Cleo stops work completely when Daniel's born. She doesn't work at all after Daniel's born. So up to his age 10, she doesn't work, and then when he's 10 to 18, she stays at home, and after that, she stays at home. And she's not paying for childcare. They are not paying for childcare. The second scenario we're going to think about is that Cleo stops work when Daniel's born and continues not working until he's 10, and then she goes back to work full time. And she continues all the way until normal retirement age. The third possibility is that she works part-time, and we're going to say half-time, while Daniel is young, and then returns to work full-time when Daniel becomes a tween, when he turns 10. And in order to be able to do that, she's going to need help. She's going to need childcare, and she's going to need that, we've said for the purposes of the example, until Daniel's 10. In each case, we have to specify how much Cleo will earn once she goes back to work. And in the first case, of course, she doesn't earn anything because she doesn't go back to work. In the second case, we're going to say that when she returns to work after staying home for 10 years, that her earnings will be half of what they were before, because her network at that point will effectively be non-existent anymore. Her skills will have may not have deteriorated, but they may not be current anymore. And her knowledge of the work that she used to do will really have depreciated. In the third case, we're going to say that while she's working half-time, she's going to earn half of what she earned before she took time off to care for Daniel. And that once she returns, she'll earn the same amount that she was earning before she stopped, or before she stopped to work part-time. And there, in effect, we're saying that her skills have been maintained, not improved, but maintained. And of course, we could think of other cases where, in fact, her earnings would be higher after she went back to work, but we're not going to do that. And finally, we're going to assume that the child care that they buy or that they spend is equal to, in cost, what Cleo earns. So her net earnings after tax will actually be negative. So she'll earn $40,000, she'll pay $40,000 a year for childcare, but she's going to pay taxes on that $40,000 of earnings. So after tax, there's a cost for Cleo to work. Now, we're looking at the value of lifetime earnings for Jeremy and Cleo. And if Cleo just stops completely, then all the earnings here are Jeremy's. And it's about $2.4 million in present value for his earnings. If Cleo goes back to work after having been out for 10 years, it's a little over $3 million. And Cleo's extra earnings are about $735,000. That's about a 30% increase over Jeremy's alone. In the case where she works half-time and then full-time after Daniel's 10, then the increase is much larger. It's 1.8 million, or about 77%, a 77% increase. So that's a big improvement in their earnings, but the costs are also higher. And let's look at them together. On the left here, we have their lifetime income. And we have, we're going from top to bottom. I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. We have their earnings in each of the three cases. And those line up with what we saw on the previous page. We have their Social Security benefits, which are shown in blue. And then their retirement account withdrawals, which are shown in a very dark blue. On the right, though, we see that the work-related expenses are increasing also, from the case where she doesn't work to the case where she restarts to the case where she works half-time and then goes back full-time after Daniel's 10. And importantly, in the third case, we have childcare as a cost. And it's a not insignificant cost. So the costs are higher. The benefits are higher. What about the net? The net financial benefits are still positive. So here we're going to look at, or here we are looking at, the two sets of columns that we looked at on the previous page, and then we're looking at the difference. So here we have the income on the left. Then we have, and this is total income. So this is earnings plus Social Security benefits plus the retirement account withdrawals. That's about $4 million. And I'm going to go back here for just one moment here. So you see that on the left here, that total is about 4 million, and then about 5, and then about 6.5. And here we have 4 and 5 and about 6.5. So we're looking at the total income. And as we move from stopping to restarting to working half-time and then going back full-time, the increase is about 25% from stopping to restart, and it's almost 60% from stopping to working half-time. The expenses also increase, and they increase by a higher percentage. So from stopping to restarting, the costs are 47% higher, and they're more than double or almost double, excuse me, when we move, no, more than double when we move from stopping to working half-time and then going back full-time. But the net is positive, right? We see the net here as being about 3.3 million, and then 4 million, and then 4.5. So there is an improvement, a financial improvement, in moving from Cleo not working at all after Daniel's born to her going back to work, and then an even larger improvement if she works half-time while Daniel's young and then goes back full-time. And that has a huge impact on their living standard. Here we're looking at what they can spend on day-to-day living after having paid for housing expenses and childcare and taxes and so forth. So if Cleo just stops work, they can spend about $19,000 a year on day-to-day living. And if she restarts, then they can spend $30,000 a year. But if she works half-time and then goes back full-time, they can spend $38,000 a year. It's almost twice as much, or it is twice as much, as if she stops work and doesn't go back. And I want to emphasize that this big impact is true occurs even though while she is in the case where she's working half-time, her net earnings are actually negative, right? Because her earnings minus the child care costs, minus the taxes she pays, are negative. She's paying more in taxes and child care than she's earning. And if we think about it that way, then we can see that it's useful to think about the half-time work for her as an investment in the maintenance and perhaps improvement of her human capital. We're showing here, first of all, in each case, we're showing, or for each case, we're showing their net income. So with the blue here, this line, this is the case where Cleo just stops. And her earnings decline, or their earnings decline. And then when Jeremy retires, the earnings drop way down. And then they start Social Security, the earnings recover, and end up here. If Cleo restarts work, it follows the same path until Daniel's 10, and then she restarts, and then the earnings continue and follow the same pattern. They're above the case where she stops and doesn't return. But if she works half-time and then goes back, the earnings are actually lower while she's taking time out. While she's working half-time, and then higher, substantially higher, when she goes back full-time, and they stay higher, and then they're higher after Social Security starts as well. So this lower earnings here pays off in terms of higher earnings after she goes back to work full-time. And it's, I think, very useful to think about that as an investment. So the extra net earnings plus the extra Social Security benefits are more than enough to offset the extra costs that she and Jeremy incur while she's working part-time. Okay, let's think about a second situation where people sometimes take time out from work. It's now much later. Daniel is grown, and Jeremy and Cleo are both working full-time. Cleo took the half-time route and is now earning, again, $80,000 a year, just like Jeremy is. And unfortunately, Jeremy's parents are having a hard time, and they need a lot of help. Now, Jeremy and Cleo could hire a caregiver at $50,000 a year to help and take care of them, or one of them could take time out, again, from work, just as Cleo did with Daniel, and take care of Jeremy's parents. Jeremy says that he could do it. It's his turn. Cleo took time out to focus on Daniel. He'll take time out to care for his parents. But Cleo thinks that there may be some advantage to her stepping out instead. And we're not going to say what that might be, but just to motivate so that we can look at what would happen if she stepped out instead. So we're going to look at three scenarios. We're going to look at one where they hire a caregiver, and they need that caregiver until they both retire at 65. The second one is where Jeremy steps out, and the third one is where Cleo steps out to take care of the parents. And it turns out that from a financial perspective, in terms of the impact on what they can afford to spend, it doesn't make any difference. That hiring a caregiver for $50,000 a year reduces remember that they could spend $38,000, now they can spend only $34,000 because it's expensive, they have to give up something. If they hire the caregiver, they're paying $50,000 a year for some years. But the impact is the same if they don't hire a caregiver and Jeremy stops working to take care of his parents. And the impact is the same if instead Cleo stops working to take care of the parents. So financially, the three options are all the same, as long as the care continues until Cleo and Jeremy retire, which is 5 years in this example. But if care stops because either, let's say, they no longer need care, or because Jeremy's parents move into assisted living or a continuing care retirement community, then the caregiver strategy is more flexible, because either Jeremy, if Jeremy was going to step out, or Cleo would have suffered some loss in their earning power if they took time out to take care of Jeremy's parents. And if they have the caregiver, they're not doing that. And the human capital doesn't deteriorate. So again, purely from a financial perspective, the caregiver strategy offers more flexibility. Now, of course, Cleo and Jeremy's parents may have a view or a strong feeling about how they want the care to be delivered. And they may prefer to have it delivered by Jeremy or Cleo. But again, from a financial perspective, the caregiver strategy is the more flexible. Thinking then about both examples, we've put a lot of emphasis on maintaining earning power. And in the case of Daniel and caring for Daniel, we focused on maintaining Cleo's earning power. And that requires keeping up Cleo's network, her knowledge and skills. And in order to do that and to care for Daniel, she needs childcare or some other sort of support. Secondly, we have to consider Social Security benefits as part of the benefit. In this case, where Cleo earns as much as Jeremy does, her continuing to work and increase her Social Security benefit also contributes to their financial well-being. And that wouldn't be the case if Cleo earned a lot less than Jeremy does because of the structure of the Social Security system. And it's also small relative to the earnings benefit. But nevertheless, if we're thinking it all the way through and considering all the benefits, we have to include that. There's something else that we didn't think about, which is that if Cleo maintains her earning power, she'd be in a stronger financial position if something bad happened, if Jeremy died, if Jeremy became disabled. It's a kind of insurance for Cleo and for the family, because if Jeremy became disabled, he'd still be part of the family, and the fact that Cleo could earn more would be very beneficial. And finally, we saw that when we thought about caring for Jeremy's parents, that even later in life, preserving human capital can be an important consideration. Because if even at 60 or 61, people may decide that they want to continue to work. And those connections, the network, the skills, the knowledge, all are valuable and all deteriorate or diminish if one separates from the workforce. And in closing, I'm going to say again what I said at the beginning, which is that there's a trade-off between family or personal priorities and finances. You can call it work-life balance. But however you think about it, more personal time means less work time and vice versa. And every person and every family makes that choice for themselves. Okay, Carrie, I think we're ready for questions and answers.
Okay, great. Yes, we do have a question from Nadia. Well, she posits, she says, it would be interesting to look at a scenario where Cleo keeps working full time the whole time her child is young, and then goes part-time once he's a tween. She said, more and more I'm seeing women who feel it's more important to be home once their kids are a little bit older. So,
Aha. Yes, yes. That's a very interesting question. If one works full-time, then one might anticipate that one's earning power would actually increase during that period of time, right? That one's network would grow, that one's knowledge would grow, that one's skills would grow, so that even if one takes time when the kids are a little bit older, again, if you're planning to go back to work once the kids are grown in some sense, then that that investment perspective that I talked about is going to be particularly important. If, on the other hand, you're not planning to go back to work or not planning to increase your work time once the kids are grown, then the investment returns are going to be less because you're going to be spending less time in the workforce after the kids are grown, and therefore you're going to have less time to earn those extra returns. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad strategy. It's just that the investment returns will be smaller.
Okay. Here's the next question from Lisa. She was wondering if you could explain a little more about the Social Security impact for the last scenario, if someone paused for a period of time before retirement.
Sure. Let me go back here. So if we're talking about this, there are the main impact on Social Security is that it is through the average earnings. So Social Security benefits depend on something called AIMR, average. It will come to me after the webinar is over. But basically, it's your average earnings over the 35 years when you had the highest earnings, and it's average indexed monthly is AIM, and indexed means indexed to inflation, and monthly means monthly earnings. And if one keeps working, then one is adding to that set of 35 years of earnings. And if one has more years of higher earnings, then that index number will be higher and the benefits will be higher because the benefits are based on that average indexed monthly earnings figure. So more years working, higher benefit. More years earning more, higher benefit. As long as that average index monthly earnings is large enough relative to the other spouse, because there's in Social Security, when one retires, one gets the larger of what's called retirement benefits or spousal benefits. And the retirement benefits are based on one's own earnings record, and spousal benefits are based on your spouse's earning record. And if your earning record is large enough so that your retirement benefit is more than half of your spouse's benefit, then you're going to get your retirement benefit. But if it's smaller, then you're going to get your spousal benefit, which is half of your spouse's retirement benefit. May have gotten a little more than it's a little more complicated than we might have thought.
Well, here's a follow-up from Lisa. If in our 60s, our salary has decreased a little, would there be no impact if our peak 35 years were in the middle of our career? This is talking about a person who is unmarried.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But you have to look at it on an index basis. But since inflation is generally positive, right? Earnings that are lower now are going to be substantially lower on an index basis. So an extra year of earnings, if you already have 35 years of earnings that are higher than your earnings now, adding to your years of earnings won't necessarily increase your benefit. However, regardless, it will still be true that waiting longer to take your benefits will increase your benefits, because benefits are highest for people who start them at age 70 and lowest for people who start them at age 62. And benefits increase from starting at age 62 all the way up to age 70.
Okay. Well, I have a question. We were talking about the half-time versus full-time versus stopping work entirely. Is it always better for someone who works to work part-time or half-time rather than stopping, or rather than, stopping and restarting? Is it always going to be better?
That's a hard question. I think that from the perspective, I think the way to think about it is from the human capital perspective rather than from, do I keep working or not? If what you're doing is going to help maintain or improve your human capital, then it's going to be better from a financial perspective to keep working in some capacity. But if it's not, so suppose that you're an architect and you decide that you're going to take time off and teach piano lessons. Completely made up example. Teaching piano lessons is not going to help you maintain your skills or your network as an architect. So that's doing that. Teaching piano lessons is not going to be particularly helpful from the perspective of maintaining or improving your human capital. But if you can find some way to maintain or enhance your human capital, then continuing to work will be better from a financial perspective.
Okay, well, thank you. Lisa says thank you, that your answers were very helpful to her as well.
Great.
I'm looking. Are there any other questions? Feel free to put them into the Q&A section, the little boxes at the bottom. If there are no more questions, then
okay, so then we'll move on and talk just a little bit about the next webinar, which is going to be about graduate school and whether it's worth the investment or not. And that will be next Thursday, the 22nd of April at 2 o'clock. And we'll hope to see you then. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.